welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to have on our friend Glenn Kirschner, former 30-year federal prosecutor, served in the U.S. Army and JAG Corps, a legal analyst on MSNBC, and his YouTube channel, wildly popular, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner. He's on Blue Sky. He's got a podcast. He's got merch. He's got everything. And he's friends with Frank Figliuzzi, who's a one-man shop. Frank's like a souvenir shop when he comes on. He's got a whole bunch of stuff all the time. I love Frank. So good to see you, Glenn.
Hey, good to see you, Dean.
So look, we're 3 weeks and a half into a lawless presidency. What stands out? What's your takeaway where we are right now?
Because I'm a rule of law guy, 30-year federal prosecutor, both in the Army and at the Department of Justice. I mourn for the rule of law. I mourn for the good men and women at the Department of Justice, all of whom, Dean, got the fork in the road email that said resign or else. And, then I just heard Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's criminal defense attorney, who still obviously has an attorney-client relationship with Donald Trump, but he's off to the leadership of DOJ to engage in what sounds like a conflict. He's going to be looking into all those J6 cases. I hear him say things like, the Department of Justice is full of good men and women, hard-working, dedicated public servants, and yet the president of the United States told them all to resign or else. And the or else is, we can't guarantee you'll have a job if you don't resign. Why would you do that to the entire public service corps, 2.1 million strong, if they're all good men and women? So thank you, Todd Blanche, for directly contradicting Donald Trump.
It's interesting. To me, what Trump is doing now, the lawlessness, the pushing the envelope, unconstitutional orders, it goes back, and I want to get your reaction, to the fact that Trump was never held accountable for his crimes, especially the coup. When you don't hold a criminal accountable, why don't they think they can get away with everything and anything? And Trump, his entire life has been that. But the guy, Glenn, did a coup and an attack in front of our eyes. And Merrick Garland, I don't know what he did. So do you think the fact that he was never held accountable plays a role in his just being so emboldened and brazen in our face and this stuff?
Yes, because crime pays for Donald Trump. So, if you don't hold a bank robber accountable, he's going to keep robbing banks,
Yep.
maybe even try to rob the U.S. Treasury. And, Donald Trump is so emboldened, not only by the lack of accountability and how he gamed the system to get all his criminal cases, basically dismissed. But he is now using his Department of Justice in the most overtly corrupt way. It's beginning to feel, and I say this with absolutely no pleasure, like the Department of Justice is this criminal enterprise. It's this big lawless mob, because yesterday we had Emil Bove, who is the acting, Deputy Attorney General, another one of Donald Trump's criminal defense attorneys, say to the prosecutors in New York, who worked their tails off together with the FBI, the grand jurors, and others, to bring a 57-page indictment against Eric Adams for all kinds of corruption crimes. They said to those prosecutors, we're directing you to dismiss those criminal cases, not for a lack of evidence, but because we want Eric Adams to be in a position to, quote, help Trump. What do you say in response to that? That is using the Department of Justice as leverage to get somebody who is rightfully indicted for his crimes to help Donald Trump. This is corruption in the open.
Very much so. And in the memo sent by DOJ, Maine DOJ, to the Southern District of New York, because it was released to the public, it says the pending prosecution unduly restricts Mayor Adams' ability to devote full attention and resources to illegal immigration and violent crime that's escalated under the policies of the prior administration. There's somehow improper interference in his reelection campaign. I live in New York. The guy's despised. He's hated. Doesn't mean he can't win, because the other Democrats are just going to cannibalize each other. But guy, he's not doing a good job in New York. You haven't interfered in his election. This is bullshit. Look, Glenn, in the big picture, how much does what we're living through shake your belief in our system?
It shakes me to my core, because, lawlessness is winning the day. And the good news is the federal courts are holding strong. But if Donald Trump decides to start defying court orders, then, we really are finally in a true constitutional crisis, which we throw that term around a lot because it feels like our Constitution is always in crisis with Donald Trump in charge. But it really is when two branches of government refuse to basically abide by the lawful authority of one another. So federal courts or the Supreme Court says, Trump administration, this is unconstitutional. You can't do it. If the Trump administration says, we don't care, we're doing it anyway. That's what we are creeping toward. He's flirting with plunging us into a constitutional crisis. I would say it's gone from flirting to maybe going steady, and he's about to propose. But, we're going to get there very quickly. And then the question is, okay, if he starts violating federal court orders, what do we do? How does that get resolved? And what I would point to is the federal code, for anybody scoring at home, 28 USC 566C, which says U.S. Marshals, yeah, you're part of the executive branch, but you shall enforce all federal court orders, period. So the U.S. federal marshals, although they reside at the Department of Justice, will be legally duty bound to enforce contempt orders, for example, if they are issued by federal judges against Trump officials. This is going to get ugly.
So, and I'm talking with Glenn Kirschner. It's such an important point you made because people keep raising. I had Norm Eisen on. We talked about it yesterday. What really happens? So if Trump himself or Elon Musk or someone says, I don't care what the court says, and Trump's like, we're going to ignore it. So the so then as a procedural matter, it goes back to that judge who then enforces their order by holding someone in contempt, which could include fines or imprisonment. It's a coercive action. It's not criminal. It's to get you to adhere to the conduct of the order. So people keep saying, but, oh yeah, the U.S. Marshals work for the executive branch. So what happen as a practical matter? The judge says the U.S. Marshal, go enforce that order, or does someone say that? I mean, how does this work logistically? And does Trump then say, if you do that, I'm going to fire? Or Pam Bondi at DOJ, the AG, say, if you do that, you're fired?
Yeah, well, they can't fire federal judges. They can seek to have them impeached and removed, but there need to be offenses proved.
Well, about the U.S. Marshals, I mean, that are sent out.
Oh, no, the U.S. Marshals, listen, they're going to have a decision to make. I worked with them for decades. And, you hear that phrase, they always get their man or woman, if I can update it. They do. I mean, they are amazing. They are a crack outfit. I have nothing but respect for them. They understand that the law demands that they enforce lawfully issued federal court orders. So they're going to do their job. Now, I know he's just named somebody who's going to be the next director of the Marshal Service, somebody from down in Florida, shocking. And I don't know if that person is a straight up law enforcement official who will take his oath to the Constitution seriously, or if he'll just pledge his loyalty and fealty to Donald Trump. Don't know at this point, but I predict that the U.S. Marshals will do their job, even if their leadership pressures them to violate the law, and I hope their leadership doesn't do that. Typically, what you do is you have to quit or resign, but don't tell me that I have to quit because I am, deciding to obey the federal law and be loyal to my oath to the Constitution. Those are fighting words. Don't tell me I have to resign. I will obey the law and I will let the chips fall. That's what I expect, Dean, from the U.S. Marshal Service, knowing them the way I do. Now, we have seen other government institutions, bend and fail and break, in the face of pressure from Trump and company. So I don't expect the Marshal Service to do that, but, nothing is beyond the imagination.
No, it's the same conversation I had with my colleague, Tom Hartman. He hosts the afternoon show. And we were on, and he said to me, well, what if Trump says, ignore that order or you're fired? And do they ignore it? And, they could, but that would have ended the system a lot earlier if someone could just defy and fire U.S. Marshals from enforcing actions against the executive branch. But Glenn, as someone who used to be a prosecutor, can you tell people just logistically? So a judge says, here's an order, and say Elon Musk, he's in contempt. You have a judge in D.C. says Elon Musk is in contempt. He's going to be fined $1,000 a day, and he's going to be held in custody until he complies with his order. Then at that moment, does that order then go to the U.S. Marshal? The U.S. Marshal goes out and fines Elon Musk?
There's a lot more to it than that. There are two kinds of contempt. There's civil contempt, which involves penalties and fines, and it tries to financially coerce people into complying with court orders. If you move over to criminal contempt, then there are more due process procedures that will kick in. You're going to need notice. You're going to need to have a hearing. You're going to, before you can find somebody in contempt and order them detained. So there is a lot more to it. But at the end of the day, if contempt is found by a judge and the judge decides that the remedy or the punishment that will be imposed for the contemnor is detention, he hands the warrant, the bench warrant, directing the U.S. Marshals to take the person into custody. Usually it's called a forthwith. What does that mean? It means don't take him right to the D.C. jail where we house both local and federal pretrial detainees. Bring him forthwith in front of me, the judge. So you can detain him, you can transport him, put him in front of me. And then what happens, Dean, is often the judges will blink. That's not a criticism. But what I can tell you, there's a great Harvard Law Review article from 2018 that completely surveys all of the contempt cases against the federal government. And I'm not even going to pretend to try to summarize it, but the bottom line is it is available. You can jail federal government officials for being in contempt of federal court orders, but it is almost never done. However, it can be done. It's usually avoided, Dean. And I celebrate the fact that it's usually avoided because we don't end up in constitutional crisis territory. Usually the federal government relents and says, okay, we'll stop being lawless. We'll start abiding by lawful court orders. But, Trump, you think he's going to take that position?
No, the good thing is Elon Musk is not really a government employee, right? He's this weird special thing. So they can grab him and bring him before the court, which I would love to see Elon. I can just see him if he's in prison. It'd be like out of a movie. He'd be talking to everyone there and preaching. He seems like a pontificator, like a guy who loves hearing his own voice and talk. Like yesterday, the press conference, sort of in the Oval Office, just talked and talked. Even Trump, there's photos of Trump who looks like, come on, I like doing the talking. This is a bit much. All right, so Glenn, all hyperbolicness, if that's even a word, aside, putting aside any kind of overheatedness, if Donald Trump were to start saying, I'm ignoring court orders I don't agree with, is that the end of our republic? Is that the end of this Constitution and the checks and balances of our system?
It is a constitutional crisis, and we don't often get there. Remember, during the first Trump term, the first Trump administration, when the Supreme Court said, no, you cannot put a citizenship question on the census. And Trump flirted with, well, you know what? I may just do it anyway. But he didn't. He backed down. If we get there, it's kind of uncharted water. So we don't know how you break that logjam, that constitutional crisis. Let's hope it doesn't come down to force, because if it comes down to force, Dean, and when you say let's put aside hyperbole, there's no such thing as hyperbole anymore in the age of Trump. All of this is potentially on the table as we slouch toward the end of our republic. So if it comes down to force, let's say the U.S. Marshals say, no, I'm gonna execute these court orders and take federal government officials into custody. And the Trump administration says, no, you're not. And I'm going to call the military out because the military is bigger and badder and stronger than the U.S. Marshal Service. It boils down to one issue and really one question, Dean. When I was active duty Army for 6.5 years, you know what they drilled into my head at both officers basic and at the U.S. Army JAG school, where after you become a lawyer and you pass the bar, you go to Army JAG school, which is on the campus of the University of Virginia, and you learn how to be an Army lawyer, and then they launch you off into active duty. They drilled into our heads, you must obey a lawful order, but even more importantly, you must disobey an unlawful order. It would be an unlawful order, and it might come down through the drunk Secretary of Defense to the military leadership. It would be an unlawful order for the commander-in-chief to say, I'm ordering the military to move against the U.S. Marshals because the U.S. Marshals are obeying federal law and enforcing federal court orders. That would be an unlawful order. Do the good men and women of the military, for whom I have the utmost respect, they're the opposite of suckers and losers. They're heroes and patriots. And they have political affiliation all over the spectrum. And that is what makes America great. But I think they all understand they must disobey unlawful orders. And if that's where we end up, then I have to hope the Constitution and the military's allegiance to the Constitution wins out. And I believe, I hope, and trust it will.
I'm talking with our friend Glenn Kirschner. We hope that as well. I mean, I just wrote an article a few days ago, the concern how Trump is making us less safe. Frank Figliuzzi talked about it on the show. Congressman Dan Goldman, who's on the Homeland Security Committee, talked about the putting incompetent people in key positions, offering buyouts, and everybody in the NSA, everybody in the CIA, like everybody, literally buy out everybody, and the FBI purge. That if there's some terrorist attack on our soil, that then he tries to use Insurrection Act and some provisions in that to say there's an invasion going on, and I have to send the military out. I don't need the governor's approval, and to occupy blue cities, saying it's Democrats. Nothing is beyond the pale. We have to think. We have to let our imagination go to a dark place that you only see in science fiction movies or in movies about what could happen, because that's what this guy is capable of. And I'm trying to get people to understand that. There's nothing off the table. There's no bottom to the abyss of Trump.
No. And, I think Trump is nothing but overreach, miscalculation with a smattering of incompetence and imbecility. And I think what he's doing, Dean, is he is turning larger and larger swaths of the American population against him. Listen, the FBI is, figuratively speaking, like a gun in Donald Trump's hand, right? It is the might of the Department of Justice, the United States government. It's the preeminent law enforcement agency. It is figuratively a gun in Donald Trump's hand. And what he did when he sent every single FBI employee, every single FBI agent, the fork in the road letter, resign or else, he crapped all over them. Mm-hmm. And what he's doing is unloading his own figurative gun, and he's just going to be left with a lump of metal in his hand, and you can't do as much damage with a lump of metal. So he is alienating. He alienated 2.1 million public servants who work for the federal government by sending the fork in the road memo saying, resign or else your job will not be guaranteed to you. He is alienating so many people and organizations, wide swaths of the population. And Dean, he's alienating the world. He is alienating nations against him when he said, I'm going to turn Gaza into Disneyland. I mean, you saw the world outrage as it should be. And here's the thing. You turn the whole damn world against you, Dean, including most of the U.S. citizens. You're not long for power. You're holding on to it. You're holding on to it and grabbing for it now, but it will not endure. It will collapse. And that's what I think ultimately, I don't know when, and it's going to be ugly. And a lot of people are going to be hurt in the process, courtesy of Donald Trump's policies, but it's not sustainable. I do not believe it's sustainable. That's not Pollyanna, and that's not everything's going to be okay. No, it's not going to be okay in the short run, but we're going to stand up to it in the long run, and it will implode eventually.
And I'm sure you saw the footage at the basketball game in Canada. They're booing in the U.S. national anthem. Canada's one of our buddies. That's just the organic reaction of the people there because of Donald Trump threatening to take Canada. He's going to take Canada and Greenland, and he's going to take the Panama Canal. He's going to take Gaza. Meanwhile, the price of eggs is exploding. It's up 15% in the last month. Nothing. And part of the failing of corporate media is not to refocus on what we need to talk about often. They'll just chase any shiny object of the day. Look, I hope like you. I mean, it's going to take a lot of work. People can't check out. I got to get your reaction. Last two things. Steve Bannon yesterday, his federal case was pardoned away by Donald Trump. His co-defendants went to jail in that case. It was the Stop the Steal. He stole the money of people to build a wall. They build a wall, and he was stealing the money, and he was charged with federal felonies, and Trump pardoned him. Then in New York, they charged him with 5 different felonies, facing 15 years in jail. Yesterday, he pled guilty to 1 count, received a 3-year conditional discharge, gets no jail as long as he doesn't reoffend. So he went from 5 counts, 5 felonies, 15 years to thanks for coming.
Yeah, and he's a repeat offender, right? Yep. He was convicted of 2 counts of contempt of Congress. Yep. He served 4 months in prison. Now he's a convicted felon, pleading guilty to 1 count of criminal scheme to defraud in the 1st degree, victimizing the people of New York. So you would think after his first conviction in 4 months, and now this is a felony, maybe up the ante, and he gets no punishment. That to me feels like a deep and searing injustice and makes a mockery of the accountability that I think the law demands and the people of New York deserve for what Steve Bannon did to them. Listen, I know prosecutors have difficult decisions to make when it comes to how much time to ask for. Not a decision I ever made lightly, and I know they have information available to them that we certainly don't have available to us, but it feels like a sharply unjust result. And I think what it does is it fails to deter other fraudsters who will say, wait a minute, I can come up with a fictitious foundation. I can steal from Donald Trump's supporters. Donald Trump will pardon me if I'm charged federally, which Bannon was, and he was pardoned. Yep. And then I'll get no punishment in state court. Where do I sign up to open my scam foundation? I mean, there's no deterrent value when you don't hold anybody accountable.
And last thing, Glenn, because look, it is a challenging time. It's a dark time. Are you at all, and not in a Pollyannish way, but are you inspired or reassured to a certain degree that the courts are holding up, that the framers drafted this document in 1789? And while the Congress is not a check at all, somehow these guys, these people, these men who sat around wanted to guard against the king. And as of now, that one prong of it, the executive branch, the judiciary, is saving us. I mean, I don't want to put too much weight on it, but does it make you feel a little bit better? Like this could save us?
Yeah, the courts are holding strong. They're standing up. They are the bulwark. They are the firewall, and they recognize it. I mean, it was the judge in New York, I believe, who just said, listen, the Trump administration is violating my court order to unfreeze the federal aid and funds that were allocated to the states. And the first thing that judge, is it Judge McConnell, I think, John J. McConnell Jr., the first thing he said was, I may have the name of the judge wrong, I apologize, is, by the way, let's talk about criminal contempt. Opening salvo in his 4-page order. Now, he didn't impose criminal contempt or any sanctions yet, but that's a shot across the bow. The federal judiciary understands that if they don't hold strong against a runaway criminal executive branch, then it's over. So they're going to go hard. They're going to go strong. And the only question is, does Donald Trump have anybody around him or in his Department of Justice who will say, look, boss, you cannot plunge the nation into a constitutional crisis. You cannot ignore the authority of the federal judiciary, a co-equal branch of government. You can't do this. He's backed down before. He backed down in his first administration. Let's hope he backs down again.
It is holding right now, and I hope it continues to. And as I mentioned to people, I had done some research. Only 27% of the judges in the entire judiciary are appointed by Trump. And not every one of them is a Trump firster. Some of them are constitutional firsts. The rest are either appointed by Democrats or Republicans, Reagan or Bush. And those are people who adhere to the Constitution. So that's the good thing. I mean, a couple on the Supreme Court kind of concerned me there. That's the only place that we're outnumbered. It really is. Everywhere else, we're in good shape,
Dean,
to be blunt.
Look, we always have to add this caveat or this footnote to our discussion about the court's holding. The Supreme Court. Here's the thing. I think they are now seeing the Frankenstein monster they created. And they might want to end their own judicial reign by saying, yeah, he doesn't even have to abide by our precedent, our rulings, by federal court orders. I mean, if they are literally willing to emasculate themselves, well, then there really is no hope for the continued viability of co-equal branches of government.
Yeah, but then they're just 9 people cosplaying in a robe, hanging out. They have no power. I mean, so self-preservation, we've talked about this before. Self-preservation is a great motivator. They didn't go to the best schools, work really hard to get on the Supreme Court to give away their power to the orange monster. I don't see it. So I think they don't. Glenn, it's great chatting with you. If people want to follow your work, what do you recommend? Blue Sky, the YouTube show, whatever you want to plug. Go right ahead.
So Justice Matters, my YouTube channel. It's also on an audio podcast, but you can find me there every day doing a legal analysis video. Great. You can join us on Patreon for a lot of behind the scenes stuff. I'm on Blue Sky now, and I'm launching Substack in the coming days with a really, really, for me, significant announcement that I think will surprise people. And I'll talk to you about that offline, Dean, but it's going to be going up on Substack in the coming days.
That's great, my friend. I'm on Substack too. I hope people, I look forward to seeing that. Thank you, Glenn. Have a great day, my friend. Always great chatting with you.